Welcome back to Pop Goes the 60s, ladies and gentlemen. I am Matt Williamson, and with me is special guest Antony Rotunno. And Antony is back with me. We've done several videos in the past, and today we're going to do something I've been wanting to do for a long time, and that's called the Beatles Guitar Shop. We're going to break down some of our favorite guitar parts in Beatles songs. So welcome, Antony.
Hello, back again. Got my safety blanket with me today.
Excellent. Got your
I
whoopee.
always feel safer with a guitar.
Got your whoopee. All right, good.
Yes.
Now, for those of you who don't know Antony, he has a very popular podcast called Glass Onion on John Lennon. Put a link to that in his website below. He also does another one called Life and Life Only and Film Gold, so very well-rounded. But as a musician, Antony, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background as a musician?
It's been about 35 years now since I learned the guitar. It was about 13 or 14. I can actually remember there was one catalyzing event, which I've never forgotten. So I used to go to church. I'm what you might call a lapsed Catholic, I suppose. My heart was never really in it, but we used to go to church, and I've always liked church music, as in hymns and Christmas carols. But we used to go on a Sunday morning, and it was always quite dirgy kind of organ, you know, those hymns are always played on organ. And then for whatever reason, we couldn't go on the Sunday morning. We went on the Sunday afternoon. And as I said, I was about 13 or 14. And instead of the organ, they had this rather attractive young lady that I picture her as wearing some sort of country and western shirt. She probably didn't, but you get an image in your mind. And she was playing all the hymns on acoustic guitar. I so thought, bloody hell, this is good, you know. And that kind of inspired me. And I actually started playing the guitar the same year I became a hardcore Beatles fan. But I don't actually think that they were the catalyst for me playing. I think it was actually a bit of a coincidence. But obviously once I started playing and I got into them, then I started playing their songs. And I've got a little book here. This isn't the original copy, but I had a book called The Concise Beatles Complete, which is all the chords for all their songs. And I've just bought this off eBay. I've rebought it. But the weird thing about it is that some of them are in the wrong key in this book. So I have this memory of me as a 14, 15-year-old having to transpose all these songs into the right key, which has seemed quite stressful now. But yeah, and then from there, I mean, my first actual gig was playing the church service. I sort of emulated this lady that I'd seen. And then, I had a few bands in my teenage years, played gigs and stuff, and then in terms of music appreciation, it was just Beatles all the way from 89 to about 93. And then I kind of caught back up with current music, with Nirvana and the grunge and then Britpop, and it all just seemed to fit together perfectly. And then I was a covers act for a while. I used to live in Asia, and I had a covers act. And I learned a few tricks because I used to play on my own. And when you play on your own, sometimes you have to play kind of a mixture of rhythm and lead guitar, and even a bit of percussion. So you have to get a bit of this, because it adds a bit of percussion to the song.
Right.
So you learn a few tricks from that. And then when I was in Spain, I finally made an album at the age of 40, and then I proceeded to make 2 more albums and 2 live albums. And I had a band in Spain and had a sort of full immersion back into music. But ever since I started podcasting, I've literally played 1 gig. And I don't really play much, but the music's always there, you know. And it's been nice getting ready for this, because I'm having to learn a tiny bit of George Harrison's lead guitar, because for full disclosure, I'm a rhythm guitarist. You know, I'm a John Lennon type, you know, fairly competent at playing rhythm guitar, but it's been nice to learn a few things of this. And yeah, that's it.
Okay, well, mine's much quicker. My musical background, I actually was started on violin and played that classical violin for about 7 years, I believe, and I too started in church. Although I am not a lapsed Catholic, I'm actually a practicing Catholic. And my first gig was playing with an ensemble group in the church choir. And then I did eventually move to guitar and played some guitar in church, just acoustic. But I did move over to guitar, and I was always, the classical violin just never did it for me at a young age. I was always wanting to play the string arrangement to I'm the Walrus, but there was no sheet music. My nun, the nun who taught me, would have not known any of that. So that's why I moved to guitar.
So you play electric or acoustic or a bit of both?
Well, I haven't been playing much in the past 7 or 8 years. I was busy with other things, but I always have an acoustic around. I'm too lazy to plug in the electric. got a couple electrics, but I almost never play them. That's why I got one here I brought out that I had to tune up and hadn't been brought out for a couple of years. But yeah, I like to bang around on an acoustic when I can, and it's just easy, and I just play for fun, and I'm not very accomplished, but it's fun. The Beatles are what got me into music, really, and I'm sure many people watching, people became musicians because of the Beatles, and I would consider myself one of those. They were the first group that really interests me, and the musicianship, though they were not virtuosos, really appealed to me, and I think it just always fascinated me. So we'll talk about some of that stuff on the video today.
Yeah, I mean, when you were on Glass Onion, we did 1968, we were sort of talking about how these isolated tracks, they're kind of gloriously sloppy in a way, aren't they? And there's one song in particular which I'll highlight when we get there.
Yeah, so what we'll do today on this video, folks, we're going to talk about 10 songs. We're going to break down some of the guitar and just talk about some of the individual guitars. We play a little bit for you, and we're also going to cut to some of the stems and some of the deconstructed Beatles songs where you can isolate these instruments. And what Antony said about something I've also talked about is the sloppiness of the Beatles playing. When you hear these individual isolated tracks, like, wow, these guys, this doesn't sound like studio quality, but you put all the parts together, and it's a question of the sum being greater than the parts, individual parts. So I always find that fascinating. But there's also some guitar in here and other instrumentation that just gets buried in the mix. So we're going to bring some of that forward that you may have not heard before. So let's get started. We're going to start early in their career, and let's start in 1963, Antony.
Yeah, just one general point. Just the fact that these isolated tracks, when they appeared, I actually think, although we're talking about guitar today, I think Ringo actually comes out of it best of all of them in terms of being very precise. But yeah, these isolated tracks are just an absolute gift, you know, that they've emerged over the years, and especially for musicians, it's just opened. It's just opened up a whole new world of, as you said, bits that you can't hear. So.
Yeah, I agree with you. Anybody who has delved into these deconstructed tracks, Ringo certainly sounds like the best player. He sounds studio quality, and I mean studio quality in the sense of like the closest to what a studio musician sounds to with the precision. The other three, not so much, but they don't need to be. And we'll discuss that a little bit as we go on. And it's some of those imperfections and what I call the sloppiness that gives this all the charm, that makes this stuff Beatles. And that's what I think makes this music so special.
Yeah, the other thing, just very quickly, that's emerged in the last few years, there are guys on YouTube reproducing the parts, often without vocals, which I love because you can really hear what the instruments are doing without the vocals. The one I kind of got into a few years ago was called Ably House, A-B-L-Y House, which was a band, or a group of guys, reproducing, trying to use the original equipment, but arguably playing the parts better than the Beatles. Maybe not with as much, I don't know, I don't want to say anything bad about them, but maybe it's not the same when you haven't come up with the parts yourself.
Right. Not the same soul.
Yeah, in a way, but that's not to say that these guys haven't got soul. It's just that they, like I said, when you come up with the part yourself. So you've got Ably House, and then you've got a guy called Michael Sockhill and Sam Popkin, and they seem to do everything on their own. They don't even need other people to do them. So it's absolutely incredible, yeah.
Well, that just goes to show you, it goes to show you how the Beatles' music, when dissected, is just fascinating to some people. And the whole Beatle history is an effort in dissection of some sorts, hence all these YouTube channels and stuff. And so people say, oh, just listen to the music. Is there another book on the Beatles again? What could they say? Well, new stuff is coming out all the time. So this kind of stuff is some of the newest stuff, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's even isolated, there's these videos called deconstructing, so you get all the parts for the songs. And I would say there's virtually every song from 65 onwards has got a deconstructing video now, including, get this, Revolution 9, a 45-minute video. I guess it's almost like a 5.1 thing. So you got, I mean, the 5 run-throughs of Revolution 9, they all sound pretty similar, but they've just got little other bits highlighted. And then Wild Honey Pie, which actually sounds amazing. When you hear all the guitar parts individually, you think, actually, that's not bad. You know, obviously it's a minor track. It's about 45 seconds, but he's actually put 2 or 3 guitar parts together for that. So,
Well, let's start at the beginning. We've got a great song, which is considered a rock standard, and that is "I Saw Her Standing There."
Yes, so as I said, I'm not a lead guitarist. I'm going to be mostly doing John's parts. But yeah, in terms of the guitar, so we're at E7. So the chugging rhythm is very much like Hamburg. So it's a kind of... And just one thing I noticed on the video, when he goes to A7, on a video, he slides this E7 shape all the way up to A7, which is a crazy way to play A7. But I think on the recording you've got... So it's very chuggy, and it's... You've got all that. And then George is playing this very, quite twangy and trebly guitar, and I can't really play his part, but in the middle he sort of goes. So when you're going, where my heart went boom. So that's all I could play, by the way, of that bit. But he's doing these kind of partial chords, so it's sort of halfway between a chord and a lead bit.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's really lovely watching that. And go on, you comment, because I want to talk about this Nirvana thing in a minute.
Yeah, so I think the Harrison's early playing, we're going to talk about this in the next song as well, but he is playing these partial chords and doing his lead bits right off the chords. It's almost indistinguishable. And he interjects these through the song, which I think is really, really fun. And I think Harrison's playing on this first album or two is what really gave this whole idea of rock music its sound. I mean, with the exception of maybe Link Wray with Rumble, I mean, that's a pretty heavy song. This early Beatles stuff really, I think, is where the term rock music originated from, as opposed to rock and roll.
Yeah, and what they're doing is, what George and John do, they do different inversions of the same chord. So at one point, George is even playing an E with a D shape up 2 frets, while John's got do-do-do-do-do. But one of them's got obviously a bit more of a bass on their guitar, bassy sound, and George has got this very twangy, trebly tone. But can I just give you quickly my Nirvana link?
Yes, please. I know there's a Nirvana connection here.
Yeah, I absolutely love this. When I kind of discovered it almost by accident. So, if you remember the Nirvana Unplugged in New York,
sure,
brilliant album that obviously after Kurt's death got some extra cachet. And there's a song called About a Girl, which was the first song on that. So it's just sort of E and G. And then he goes, I'll take a village wild. And then he goes, I can see you every night. So he goes E to A to C, which is, you wouldn't normally play a C chord in a song in the key of E. You'd normally play C sharp minor, but it's a how could I dance with another? Ooh. So E, A to C. So that could be one reason why that song About a Girl sounds, quote marks, Beatley.
Beatley, yeah.
Some people absolutely hate that word because they're like, what does that mean? But there's something about it where you kind of hear it sounds something like the Beatles, and then you identify that it's that chord change is one of the things.
Yeah, that comes to mind. One other grunge song that always sounded so Beatley to me is Black Hole Sun by Soundgarden. And it sounds very White Album-y. I never dissected that song, but there are songs that just sound, wow, this sounds really derivative of the Beatles. I'm not sure why, but it does.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say you could highlight like a bit that they're copying. I mean, I even think when Oasis came out, a lot of people who maybe don't play music would say, oh, they're just copying the Beatles. And I used to say, well, why don't you do it then? You know, go and make £1 million if it's so easy. Noel Gallagher was definitely a skilled songwriter.
No question, yeah.
He took bits, and obviously if you take Don't Look Back in Anger, you know, C to F, that's Imagine. He even did it in the same key.
One last thing about I Saw Her Standing There, I do love Paul's bass playing, and that was kind of a template of style for him in those early songs. And that bass he kind of lifted from I'm Talking About You by Chuck Berry.
It's actually quite difficult to play and sing this, because you could play... It's that. But what he's actually doing is... coming back to this note each time.
Okay.
And it's really difficult to actually sing the song and do that, especially, in 1963 with all the adrenaline and, they're all nervous. You can tell they're all playing everything much faster than the record. So that's not easy to do. And, again, I mean, funnily enough, I was listening to another podcast and they made a link between I Saw Her Standing There and When the Saints Go Marching In.
Oh, really? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that does make sense.
When this guy dissected it, when the Saints
go marching in.
And even I want to be in that number, how could I dance with another? It's not a million miles away. But again, who cares, really? Unless you're totally lifting it and plagiarizing, I don't care, because that's the spirit of rock. You take a bit from whoever,
Yeah, that reminds me of the story. Remember Paul McCartney was playing a trumpet. He couldn't play trumpet and sing, and he was always trying to play when the Saints come marching in for the guys, and they would laugh at him because he'd say, that sounds nothing like it. And here it's almost like he lifted it for I Saw Her Standing There.
Well, they would have known from Sheridan, wouldn't they? Because he's just like, when the Saints go marching. I don't know what to get in, but yeah.
That Elvis-y thing that Sheridan does, yeah.
Yeah, love it.
All right, well, next song here, we're going to stay in 1963, and I mentioned earlier about George's little guitar fills. We're talking about I Want to Hold Your Hand. And I think one of the reasons this song broke in the States so quickly in such a big way has to do with the lead guitar playing. So you've got John playing this rhythm stuff and George doing some chunky rhythm, and then these little guitar fills that really make the song rock music, I think.
Yeah, well, I had a question here. Is this a pop song or a rock song? And it's obviously both, because it's got so many pop hooks. You just can't help. In a way, you almost can't help liking it. You can't help. It's a bit of an earworm, but in a good way. But yeah, he's doing these twangy. It's got a little bit of country to it, but it doesn't sound anything like a country song, obviously. And funnily enough, I've been, obviously trying to play these in preparation. And it's actually quite similar to I Saw Her Standing There in the sense that John is chugging and George once again is doing this twangy, quite trebly stuff. So if you take the intro, the actual notes, it's like da 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 da, and John, instead of sort of C G D, it's C C D. So you've got, like I say, it's this chuggy stuff that evokes Hamburg and Saw Her Standing There. And then during the verses, even though it's got quite a lot of minor chords, he's just playing it like a, oh yeah, tell you something. And then you got this, and then you got a minor chord, but he's still chugging as if it's a major chord. So you got all that going on, and then George's bit that is quite easy to play in the bridge. And it's so simple. That's the thing. There's nothing complicated. So when I go, when I touch you, just something like that. And then they go back to black and white, and then you're back to the intro again. So that's obviously a songwriting thing, but. Is it rock or pop or both?
I'll go with both on that. I mean, it's hard for me, rock started to take in so many different styles come 65 that just all melded into one. But I definitely think, just like She Loves You too, for the same reasons, George is adding those fills on that song as well, where it makes it into a really solid rock song, even though it's pop.
It's just so weird that those do sound like country licks on their own. But the song doesn't sound, as I said, anything like country. It's kind of bluesy in a funny way. It's not a blues as in, traditional blues, but it's got blues influence. It's got string bends and stuff. But I think the fact that George was so obsessed with Chet Atkins, wasn't it?
And Carl Perkins, Perkins.
Yeah, I think that added so much. And obviously you get albums like Beatles for Sale, which sound quite countrified. They're not country songs, but
right.
The guitar is so countrified. So is such an important part. But George really shines. I think when he had to improvise on some of those live at the BBC, it sounds pretty ropey. But when he actually had the time to work it out, not that he had much time, you know, they're recording in a hurry, but he just worked out these really clever, but there's nothing difficult. I mean, I'm not a lead guitarist, but any basic lead guitarist could probably play those licks in terms of the notes. You know, it's not complicated, but it's just so memorable. You know?
Yeah, I agree. I think the country, because the Beatles were not blues based, really. I mean, which is kind of odd because most rock music is blues based. So there is some blues roots there, but like you say, they bring in these country licks that really, I don't know, modify it in a strange way and make it, I guess, a pop rock hybrid with a country fusion.
Yeah. There's just one other bit with George. So as I said, if you're playing a G, John would play, and then George is, he's playing sort of, he's playing a G up there. So again, yeah, I feel like they probably got together to some extent and said, well, you're doing a G down here, or one of them saw whatever the other one was doing. I guess if John's writing most of the songs with Paul, George is seeing what shape John's doing and then decided to do a different inversion. So I think that's how they would have worked it out.
And that makes a wider palette of sound too, which makes all those guitars just kind of come together all much easier and just gives us more spectrum to listen to.
Come together, I see what you've done there. Can't help it.
It's a bit early in the video for that, isn't it?
Yeah, that's not one of our songs, is it?
No. All right, well, let's move into 1964, 65. So 64, like you mentioned, Beatles for Sale, sounded a little bit countryish. We hear a lot more acoustic playing on Beatles for Sale, even end of parts of A Hard Day's Night. But we were going to talk about You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, which is off the Help album.
Yes, so I want to just demonstrate how the Beatles chords are more intricate than you think. So when I had this, probably that book I showed you earlier, if you play, say, D, so G, D, F, G, C, F, C for the verse, that sounds fine. But if you watch closely, everybody, if you think of the song like Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, you've got that. You've got these two fingers here on the high strings. So in fact, what they're actually doing is a G, D suspended fourth, F add 9, which is much more interesting than just playing G, G, D, F, G or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then George has this little insert coming into the chorus. And then when they play Hey, you got to hide it, George actually plays the melody. So I'll try that again. Which we'll see in the next song. But yeah, it's just very clever, it's lovely. What I wanted to ask you, do we know how many guitars are on this? Because the very first time I heard this, I thought, how are they making that sound? Because you can't, when you hear those guitars all crashing together, you can't really tell distinctly what's what until they're isolated. So
yeah, my research tells me 3 guitars. So we have John on an acoustic 12-string, George also on an acoustic 12-string, and George on a Spanish acoustic. Now, is the Spanish acoustic, does that have nylon strings?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if that's true, 3 guitars. The Beatles typically overdid it with the guitars, and I always liked that, so it gave it more of a rich tone. And I think that's what we're hearing here. Just like that, the opening chord of A Hard Day's Night, that's 2 guitars, a bass, and maybe a piano key as well to give you that, what sounds like a single chord, but man, it's has quite a reverberation.
Yeah. If you think of a song like I've Just Seen a Face, which is on the same album, when those guitars come crashing in, it's a little bit similar. I think on You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, there may be an electric bass. Someone will know. On I've Just Seen a Face, I think there's either an acoustic bass or bass played on an acoustic guitar. But I love when they're all crashing in with those guitars, because you can't quite tell what's what and then you've got a little nod to a song we're going to do later, and you got.
Oh
You're
yeah,
on the
yeah.
D chord with a descending bass, which we'll definitely see later. And yeah, just really clever. And it's just this one's actually, I would say this one's played pretty well. This one sounds a bit smoother than some of the other ones.
Yeah, I think it's the production. It's got a real smooth overall feel. There's nothing harsh about the recording at all. I'm not sure if Martin was trying to do that. I'm not sure, but that's how I always heard this song. And the flutes help, I guess, too. We're having that outside musician come and overdub the flutes, which makes, I think, really adds to the song.
Yeah, yeah. What else have I got here? Yeah, like I said, we get this D shape that is one that, I mean, everyone knows this. It's on American Pie, it's on all kinds of songs. But I don't know if that was a new thing then to play around this D shape, but we're going to see more of that in a minute. But yeah, this layering with the guitars. If you think also of Girl, which was on Rubber Soul, I never know if it's a balalaika or a bouzouki. It's one of the two. People think it's.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Is it
yeah.
bouzouki or a balalaika?
Well, it's not a sitar. That's what some people have mistakenly said. I thought it was just an acoustic guitar that's just with heavy on the pick, but I'm not sure.
No, it is, but it's supposed to sound like something else.
Oh, I see.
Which one's
Gotcha.
a Greek? Is that bouzouki?
Bouzouki, yeah. That's a bouzouki.
Yeah, I
would
think
be
it's
Greek.
supposed to sound like that, but it's actually a guitar that's capoed really higher,
Okay.
like the 8th or the 9th fret. So yeah, I mean, it's not. That's the thing. They're always experimenting, and some of the guitar sounds they get are just fabulous. And it's nothing fancy. It's just they seem to have this taste for exotica as well. So on Rubber Soul, you've obviously got Michelle, and then you've got Girl, which some people call Zorba the Greek meets a German marching band. You know, something like that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I find some of the Beatles guitar work intricate and sophisticated and sometimes difficult for me to play. I've always had a hard time figuring their stuff out just by ear because they'll do these strange chords that I didn't know. But when you dissect it, it is rather simplistic, and just when you put all the pieces together, it just sounds wonderful.
Yeah, just to mention a chord inversion, it's not on one of the songs that we're doing today, but if you take a D chord, John used to put, for the guitarist, his pinky on the 4th fret of the D string to make an F sharp. So if you listen to the difference between... It's not a huge difference, but they just seem to be well into chord inversions. And we'll see a bit later with one of the later songs. John's taking a D chord and moving it miles up the neck to get this chiming thing. We'll get to that later.
Yeah, John, he really makes good use of that 4th finger. I mean, in tons of songs. It's really, I think that's, Norwegian Wood and others, of course. But yeah, he's really a better guitarist than he ever gave himself credit for.
Yeah, he's quite memorable, I think. We'll get to one later where he used to say, we know he was easily bored, and he used to get bored of just doing chugging rhythms. So he used to say, I'll work something interesting out for myself. So, yeah, very good.
Pulling out my electric 12-string here for If I Needed Someone. And this is usually played with a capo on, I believe, the 12th fret. But my capo is not clamping down properly on this 12-string. So I'm just...
7th fret.
Oh, 7th fret. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it should be... So I'm just going to play it in the standard first position. But generally, this has always been one of my favorite songs. I'm a huge Byrds fan. And we've had Roger McGuinn essentially base the whole sound of the Byrds on the Beatles, on A Hard Day's Night. He fell in love with the instrument. And I just love this jangly sound that this makes. So just move this over here. So yeah, basically what George does here that I've always liked is the solo. You've got, let's see here, the solo, which is basically the chords just played over and over. So that jangly sound, I've always been in love with, and apologize, it's slightly out of tune here. These are a little tough to keep in tune, but That's bending of the strings that the Beatles don't do, but the Byrds always did. McGuinn did this a lot, which gives that really spacey feel because you got the two strings really offering different tones because they're separated.
Yeah.
So
one thing I love on this is George actually plays three slightly different parts, which are almost exactly the same. So you got and then when he plays the actual on the verse, he's playing the melody.
Yep.
And of course 4 years later he would play in exactly the same position.
Exactly.
And then as you said, in the verse it's as you were doing, he's playing the chords at the same time, but I'm just playing the melody.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, and it's so beautiful to hear the three-part harmony on the top of it. It's like why this has always been one of my favorite songs, and I have no problem saying that because of the guitar and because of the three-part harmony. I mean, that's some of the Beatles' best offerings there, and combined together. I just love it.
If I had some more time to spend, then I guess I'd be with you, my friend. If I needed someone.
Yeah, that's why I fell in love decades later with Free as a Bird. I wasn't mad on it when it first came out. Then I heard an isolated vocal track and heard those harmonies after George's bit. Whatever happened to? And then those, and I'm like, oh my God. And then what's so nice when you're on the 7th fret, even the chords sound lovely. So in the middle, when you come some other day, it might not have been like this, but you see I'm too much in love. Everything just sounds lovely when you're on this. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I don't pull this guitar out nearly enough. I bought this, I've had this since I was like in college. And it's my least played guitar because it's just kind of a pain to tune. And I can see why people don't use electric 12 strings a lot, especially on stage, because they're not easy to keep in tune. But
as soon as you started playing that, I could hear the Byrds. That sound is so... that electric. Because it's different to what George did in 64.
Yeah, sounds great. So, and the Byrds made it their own. They really took it to another level. So, speaking of the Byrds, go ahead. Sorry, cut you off there.
No, on the same song, meanwhile, Johnny Boy, he hasn't really got much to do. He's playing. So obviously, if you play a D on the 7th fret, you're in the key of A. So he's just sort of most of the time. But then when this sort of guitar break comes out, he suddenly starts going. Because as we said, he gets bored just chugging along. So, and then I was listening to oldies radio however long ago, and Turn, 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 which is love it, absolutely brilliant song. Words from the Bible, I believe, right?
Yes, the book of Ecclesiastes.
That's it. And then halfway, when I got to the solo of that, you could hear David Crosby or whoever it was going diddle-diddle-ding, diddle-diddle-ding. And I think that came out before Rubber Soul, I guess, did it?
Very close.
Because Rubber Soul was December, so I'd imagine it was earlier.
I think it came out, it might have been December. It could have been October, November, but yeah, it was in the same area.
There was Bells of Rimney, did that come out early?
No, yeah, that was on the first album in March of, or I think that came out in May of '65.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Tambourine album.
Yeah. So yeah, as I said, John liked to do strumming. So if you think of something like I'm Happy Just to Dance with You. He's responsible, when you hear that song, he's responsible for that different strumming.
That's one of the charming things of that song. That song has got a nice feel to it. It's not obviously a brilliant lyric, but it really moves along nicely.
Yeah, and he came up with that. So obviously, All My Loving is the famous example of the triplets, which I still think is amazing that they played that. The first song they ever played live in America was that. Because it's so difficult.
Yeah, I wonder why they did, but boy, it's great. And getting back to the live version of If I Needed Someone, the Japan shows, they played that song live, and it's always fun to hear the bass in that as well. Paul plays an interesting kind of octave style bass that it just makes the song, takes it to a higher level.
Well, he plays the same line through the verse, through the whole song.
Yeah, he does.
Not the bridge, but the other bits. So when the chord changes, he's still playing the same thing.
And it sounds, it just grounds the song perfectly, and it lets the guitars and the voices soar, over the bass.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that because you've chosen it, but I love that song as well. It's that chiming. It's just so life affirming. It just makes you think of summer and sunshine and things.
Oh yeah, no question.
Sitting outside listening to that.
That's one of the
guitar.
Yeah, it's one of the things that makes the Beatles a joyous listening experience. So those are some of the elements that brings the joy.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, I love that sound. So what make is that one?
Yeah, it's a Hamer that I got in the late 80s, I believe. And a guy that I went to grade school and high school, this was originally his guitar, Paul Anopa. Paul, if you're watching, I bought your guitar. And I've been taking good care of it. It's been in the case mostly for the last 35 years. But yeah, it's got the headstock, it's got all the, unlike the Rickenbacker, which has got the octave strings, I think, are in the point out the back. So that's actually a little bit easier to tune than this, because I'm always kind of, well, where am I at here? So yeah. But I mean, this was at the time, it was a pretty affordable. I don't know what this goes for now, but the Rickenbacker 12s are real expensive now. All right, so moving on to our next song we're going to talk about is a Revolver piece. And Auntie, this is one that you really like. I'm Only Sleeping.
Well, I was actually on a Beatles podcast earlier this year called My Favourite Beatles Song, and we spent nearly an hour talking about just this one song, which is crazy. But yeah, I really, because there's so many different versions or demo bits, or because that Revolver box set came out, and I think we ended up with about 12 different versions, some of them just being isolated vocals or isolated guitar. And I just grew to love this song, because this song is actually in E flat minor. I think they very speeded it, I'm pretty sure. But if you listen to the demo, it's very, like if you play the guitar up here, it gets what you might call a spiky sound. So on the demos, you've got this sort of, it starts. It sounds quite languid, I'd say, but that's to do with the fact that it's been taken down a semitone, because there's a demo of it where it's much faster, and it almost doesn't fit the song, even though it's still great. But they slowed it down. It's got that kind of quite lazy, languid thing. And I was talking about in this podcast, it's a perfect sort of evocation of the sleepy / stoned John Lennon of 1966. And I was trying to think of a word to describe the bass, because the bass sort of goes do 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 do. It sort of goes up a bit and comes down a bit, and so I went to Revolution in the Head, as you do, and he called it a tiptoeing bass, which is perfect. Okay. And I had this idea of John being asleep and Paul sort of tiptoeing in and out of the room with his bass.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, so it's quite, like I say, it's quite spiky, and but it's I don't know if I'd use the word sloppy, but it's not particularly precise, as John Lennon wasn't, and that's why it seems to fit this song. It's a bit kind of, you can imagine him being quite hazy, as he spent a lot of his time quite hazy, but you've got this kind of...
Yeah, I would say, it's interesting because we're entering the psychedelic period here, and Lennon is still doing much of his composing on an acoustic. And in the psychedelic period, which I know pretty well, I mean, I don't think a lot of people were really composing on acoustics. They were kind of starting with the distorted guitar to create the psychedelic sound first, maybe. But in this case, yeah, maybe it's that Indian stuff was maybe rubbing off him a little bit.
Something I'd never thought about is that obviously you said, as I said, the Byrds saw A Hard Day's Night and fell in love with the 12-string, but they managed to make that 12-string sound a bit Indian.
Yeah, they did. They
which
did.
obviously Indian music hadn't entered George's life, really. I mean, okay, around Help, yes, but it's really 66. So that's quite weird that happened.
Yeah, I guess that Indian sound and the 12-string, the droning of those open strings, I think would account for, I guess the simulation of a sitar, those droning open strings. And I think that Byrds did a little bit of that. And in this song, maybe that's what we're hearing. I don't know, there's not many open strings in here, but I do hear that on some Beatles songs.
I think it's quite open chords, I think. And then, of course, George has got his backwards guitar. And if you know, I'm sure you know Castles Made of Sand by Jimi Hendrix.
Mm-hmm.
That's about a year after this. So, I mean, we know that Jimmy was a Beatles fan, well, for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. Next song. Of course, you've got Give It Away by the Chili's. There's a couple of guitar solos there.
Yeah.
Not only a backwards.
Yeah, I never thought of that. That's right.
Yeah, 25 years after Revolver. And again, I'm sure John Frusciante, I mean, he loved Hendrix, but I'm sure he loved the Beatles as well. So you've got the backwards guitar there, and it does just sound, it's so perfect, because I'm very bad at describing music. I can't think of adjectives to describe music, but I don't know if hazy is the word, but it's off-kilter, And John Lennon was off-kilter in the mid-60s, there's no doubt about it,
Yeah, the whole I'm only sleeping, it's kind of a gray day, it's kind of rainy out, and it's kind of, I don't know, foggy or something. The mind is foggy, it's just, that's the way it makes me feel.
I think it's sleeping / there's drug connotations for sure, marijuana basically. I don't hear LSD, because when I was reading up on this song when I did this podcast a few months ago, they were talking about LSD influence. I don't hear that. I hear marijuana and sort of sleepiness, because he used to sleep a lot, He would wake up in the afternoon, and I think who was it said? I think it was Ray Coleman said the one thing John hated more than going to bed was getting out of it the next morning. Which is quite good.
That is good. Never heard that.
And he wasn't sure what day it was. He used to ask people like Maureen Cleave or Hunter Davis, what day is it again? Is it Wednesday? Is it Tuesday?
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, I guess by this time he wasn't. When they weren't touring, he didn't know what day it was. Didn't need to, maybe.
Yeah, that's it. Didn't need to know what day it was, exactly. Yes.
All right, well, we're going to move into the next song here. We're going to the title track of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Now, one of the things that, in this day and age, Sgt. Pepper is the whipping boy of most Beatle fans. People like to rip on this now after a couple decades of accolades. And one of the things I like to point out with the Sgt. Pepper title track is it is a heavy rock song. And people don't really talk about Pepper as being a heavy rock album, but I think this song and a couple others on there bring it into that realm easily.
Yeah, I do have to take issue with Paul on one thing. So this thing about Jimi Hendrix opening with this song, apparently 2 days after Sgt. Pepper came out. I did a show in 1967. It's actually 9 days. Because Pepper didn't come out on June the 1st. We know this. It came out a week earlier. It was sort
That's
of
true.
Rush released. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, I don't think Jimi Hendrix would need 9 days to work this song. I mean, I think... But the chords are not complicated. Yeah.
Antony, 9 minutes would have probably been all he needed.
You're right. I mean, the weird thing about it is that you've got it's French horns, isn't it? So you've got brass and quite heavy guitar. And I guess we saw that on "Got to Get You Into My Life" because the guitar on that's quite aggressive. It's got quite a fuzzy or whatever you call it sound. Lady Madonna as well. But when I was learning this song, I was absolutely amazed. And I want to credit a guy called Mike Pacelli who does.
Oh yeah, Mike is great.
I love Mike. You can actually play this song with a movable shape on the bottom 3 strings. So it'd be the intro. And the strumming is interesting, sort of. During the brass, he sort of does a staccato thing, a bit of that, and you can literally play the whole song. It's about 5 or 6 chords, pretty standard chords, but
yeah,
you know, we're Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We hope you will enjoy the show, etc.
yeah. I love the chords in this song, and this is I don't hear a lot of bands cover this song. I'm not sure why, but it's a fun rock song to play. And the thing I've always liked is, you know, you've got on the title track, you've got, I guess it's George and Paul playing both rhythms and leads. And I think Paul is the one playing the bendy notes that gives it that really weird sound that I think makes it a little more psychedelic as well.
There's this endless mystery about who played what. I mean, Robert Rodriguez just did a whole show about it.
Oh, did on this song or just on what songs?
They handpicked about 10 songs.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The only one I disagreed with was Dear Prudence, because I think Jerry Hammock has made a great case for that being Ringo,
oh yeah.
It's the eternal mystery, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, the more I listen to the Beatles with a musician's ear and the stems and these deconstructions, you can get a feel for the style of each guy, and it's getting easier to differentiate their guitar playing, just as it's easy to differentiate their voices. It's not quite that pronounced, but the more you listen and the more you kind of watch them playing live and stuff, you kind of get a feel for who's playing what. So in this case, you know, George's his little choppy rhythm playing, which is different than John's. And one of the songs I was going to use in this video but didn't was "I'm the Walrus," because it's not a guitar song, but the deconstructions some of the basic tracks with George playing is pretty cool. It's just you don't hear those chords on guitar much. So anyway, like you said, there is a lot of debate over who's playing what, and as they were able to overdub more, they were always able to double up on guitars and stuff and punch in certain things. So it's still to be determined, but yeah, I'm with you. I'm kind of the overdub on the end of Dear Prudence. I do think is Ringo, and from what I hear from drummers, actual seasoned drummers, that's what they say.
Now, it sounds a bit like Strawberry Fields as well. That was a good that was a spot that somebody made. And I don't understand the amount of interviews Paul and Ringo do. Can't someone just ask them? I mean, surely they'll remember. I know they're 80, whatever they are. 80,
yeah, you know, I don't know that they would remember. I mean, this is a long time. I mean, a session. I mean, and the other thing too is like you get when they're laying down basic tracks, sometimes stuff gets wiped. Like for example, like John Lennon playing organ or piano on something, but then by the time they're on the basic tracks, then I think his stuff may have gotten wiped and he's got some organ. So you get this stuff as the song gets built in the studio, the stuff kind of comes and goes. Did Paul play bass on She Said, She Said? Well, it was thought that he didn't, but when we got the Revolver box set, he's on some of those tracks on the earlier takes. So if you were to ask Paul today, did you play on She Said, She Said? He might say, well, no, I strummed out. It's like, well, actually, we do have you playing on these takes. So somebody might say, well, yeah, you did play on it. I mean, I don't expect them to give us too much. I have to rely on my own ears and other experts' ears, I guess, and try to get some kind of consensus.
Yeah, I think the one that's been debunked is that John played bass on Helter Skelter. I think it's fairly clear that that's Paul.
Yeah, I think
Because
that
it's a
has
bit
been
like Yer
debunked.
Blues. It's a bit like Yer Blues, actually. It sounds quite sloppy for him, but I think he was just
Hmm.
loose and... I mean, they're probably having a few drinks when they made that. But
Well,
yeah,
in the case of Helter Skelter, that long version, which we've never heard yet, the 27-minute version, which was edited down to like 4 minutes and something for the anthology, that version I think John is on bass. So
oh, is it?
these things get conflated, which is completely understandable. But what are you gonna do?
Yeah. But go back to this Sergeant Pepper one. So, yeah, just all these chords are all sevenths, which is great. Sevenths have a bluesy sense to them. And it's just brilliant, And I would agree with you. I think Paul is definitely doing the twangy stuff. And like you said, I'm the Walrus. There's a couple of other songs around 67-ish era where you can hear George's quite distinctive rhythm style. But I think this guitar track is probably the sloppiest of all the ones that we're talking about.
Really?
In a kind of glorious way.
Yeah,
It's not...
in
To
a
me, it
grungy
doesn't
way.
sound... Yeah, in a grungy way, there you go. It doesn't sound too smooth.
Well,
When
it's
you hear
almost
the
as
track.
if, well, let me, if I may say, it's almost as if they were trying to make it sound sloppy. It's like, almost like what John was doing with Revolution a year later. It was intentionally grungy and sloppy and dirty and grimy, like I Feel Fine maybe earlier, but it seems like they're kind of basking in that a bit.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if it was intentional, yeah. Or they just wanted to make it spontaneous. Because obviously did you say on the reprise someone else is playing the guitar?
Yeah, the reprise, it's John and George on guitars. So that was cut later at a different time. So John is on guitar on that one as well.
That's even looser, that one, isn't it? But
Mm-hmm.
again, glorious. I think the idea of a reprise, it's supposed to be almost a loose version of what you've heard earlier.
Mm-hmm. I guess you're right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was such a revelation to see those funny chords. And I didn't know that at all, so that was great learning this one. So I love it.
Yeah, and they still sound great.
Yeah.
Well, let's shift into 1968 here, and one of my favorite guitar pieces by the group is Dear Prudence. Tune that down to D. Yeah, Dear Prudence, for me, I know that when they recorded it, there's a lot of guitars overdubbed, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where they got all the tracks to do that, but it gives such a rich sound. And you could tell they were really meticulous about the guitar playing on this track.
Yeah, I mean, obviously on the Isha demo it's clearly acoustic, but when I saw one of these guys reproducing it, and they always reproduce it perfectly to me, they're using electric guitars. So I thought when I first heard the White Album, 3 decades ago, I thought it must be a treated acoustic guitar, but maybe it's electric. But yeah, the intro is just really lovely. Then you got this descending bass. It's just fantastic, and now it doesn't seem like much just to go D, C, B, B flat, just have the descending bass. But obviously we've got what's known as the Travis picking that he learned from Donovan. On the look around bit, it just sounds so, I'm not saying my playing, but the part sounds just so lovely. And then George again, I can't play this very well, but the funny thing about Dear Prudence, did you notice how kind of almost angry George's guitar, the tone on George's guitar? Is again is a bit spiky. It doesn't seem to fit, but the song is so amazing. So he's sort of doing. Look around, round.
Yeah, a lot bluesier for sure.
Here he goes, Dear Prudence, with one of the last verses.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is quite bluesy, isn't it? Yeah.
It is, and like I was mentioning earlier with those little guitar fills he was doing on I Want to Hold Your Hand, he's kind of doing that near the end of the song, what you just played, where he's adding, he's got a lead guitar, he's got to record something, so he's just kind of going with the song and just naturally adding those little riffs in there based off the chords, which sound great.
But that's what's so weird about the whole thing, because like, you can take a song from 63 and 68, and as you say, you might find that he's playing a lick that's almost exactly the same, but their music had changed so much. It's just, you know, I Saw Her Standing There, or I Want to Hold Your Hand to Dear Prudence. They just don't seem to have any, you know, if you think of those two songs, they don't have any relation whatsoever, except that it's the same band.
Right, I know, and I guess they probably came back to the same chord progressions more often than I think about it, you know, but when you start breaking it down, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that. I've heard that before.
Well, I used to get a guitar magazine called Total Guitar. I don't know if you ever heard of that. But
I have, yep.
I managed to get it off eBay because, again, I lost my original copy. It had a Beatles songwriting lesson, and it had 10 Beatles tricks. I've literally got it in this room somewhere. And what I learned from this, which was absolute revelation, was that they were using all these really cool tricks in 1963, 64, and using a lot of the same tricks. So then they showed you two songs that had the same chords, but again, they're just unrecognizable in terms of songs.
Well, the thing I liked about this song, that descending bass note, I don't know where I've heard that before, Dear Prudence, but lots of groups copied that. And you hear it particularly in I Can't Find My Way Home by Blind Faith, where they're, you know... So when you go down, so yeah, they
sound really similar.
I think that's probably where Winwood got that, and I don't blame him. Don't blame him at all. And there's a reason I Can't Find My Way Back Home. I think it's just because of that same descending bass line, which I've always loved, and I like to play that.
Yeah.
So we've got another song coming up here, which is not that unlike Dear Prudence, in Sun King off of Abbey Road. Now, the guitar playing on Abbey Road, they take it up a little bit of a notch here, I think. What do you want to tell us about Sun King?
Well, yeah, just on the album as a whole, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think all that playing in January '69, even if some of it did seem a little bit aimless at times, I think that really did them a lot of good, because by Abbey Road, I think they're all playing much better than even a couple of years earlier. Sun King's a weird one because obviously it's almost part of a trilogy. You've got Sun King, Me, Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam. You've got these three characters, and all the songs are sort of roughly about a minute or a minute and a half. Mm-hmm. And they obviously fit perfectly in a medley, but you wouldn't reckon Sun King as a song on its own. You know, it seems very slight. But when these isolated tracks came out, just how unbelievably bright and lush, particularly John Lennon's guitar sounds. And obviously when you listen to Albatross by Fleetwood Mac,
mm-hmm.
you know, there's such a clear, I'd say, I wouldn't call it plagiarism, I'd call it a kinship or inspiration.
Inspiration for sure. And Lennon certainly didn't shy away from letting people know that.
Yeah, I think even the same year, didn't he say that?
Yeah, he was a fan of that song.
Yeah, so, I mean, the guitar is just, George's guitar is just a... And the bass is going... doing the octaves.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got John, probably going to butcher this, but... You know, I can't get the tone, but you know how absolutely lovely that tone he gets on his guitar.
Yeah. I assume he's playing his Epiphone Casino, I would imagine.
Yeah, and it's obviously got, what would it be, tremolo? I'm not very good with guitar effects.
Yeah, I think
Tremolo.
so. I think some tremolo on there.
Yeah,
And
it just sounds so lovely.
hmm Yeah, that's a beautiful song, and you're right. They, on its own, it probably doesn't stand on its own very well, but as part of those other songs, it really does. But it's one of those dreamy John songs, and I think you make a great point of all the playing they did January '69, how that really made their playing on the next record that much stronger. And we're going to see a little bit more of that here in the next couple tracks.
Yeah, I mean, on Abbey Road, I mean, Ringo's absolutely on fire. Paul's bass lines are just crazy, some of them. You know, they're not necessarily experimental that much. But, I mean, some of them are. Like, I Want You, She's So Heavy. If you hear the isolated bass for that, it's absolutely all over the place. And then George is just these lush guitar licks. It's just so lovely. It just, I don't know what it evokes. I don't know, being on a beach or something, just being completely relaxed, you know.
Yeah, it's like you see the sunrise or the sunset. It's just setting
the
it puts you in that place there. So yeah, that's done with a lot of intricate playing and some really attention to detail on the musicianship for sure.
Yeah, and it is simple, but then I didn't realise, I mean, I won't play all of it, but it's just got some C major 7, G minor 7, A7, F and D, E minor 7. It's got chords that you wouldn't even think would traditionally be in that key. So again, they're doing that thing as well. They're familiar chords, but you wouldn't expect them to be in that key necessarily. So I think this one, among Beatles songs, this one has benefited more from the isolated tracks, in my opinion.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think the isolated tracks are so much better sounding as you get into the Abbey Road period because they were using that different mixing console anyway. The 63, 64 era, those are hard to deconstruct. And when I hear them, there's a lot of, they're just not very clear. You hear other instruments. So.
How does, can I just ask a quick question? How does Abbey Road rank in terms of your favourite albums? Has it ever been your favourite Beatles album?
Well, I don't have much of a favorite of anything in Beatle land, but I do remember the first time it was one of the last albums I heard all the way through, and I got that one a little bit later, and I remember it sounding different to me and more modern sounding. And not just because I had heard the White Album, listened to that many times, and that's obviously a modern sounding album from a lyrical standpoint, at least to my ears at the time when I was about 10 years old, 11 whenever I heard it. And but Abbey Road, I still love side 2, and would always play that more than side 1. But when I first played Abbey Road when I was a kid, younger, the song I wanted to hear was Here Comes the Sun, because that's the only place at the time I could find it. You know, so that was the song I really wanted to hear. And then some of the other songs that I really loved later, like the next one we're going to talk about.
Well, just very quickly, I think unfortunately, because obviously John Lennon hasn't been around for such a long time, we've only got limited quotes. You know, he did a lot of interviews, but only up to 1980, which is a long time ago. And I think still some of his quotes maybe hold a bit too much water, you know, with all of us sometimes at various times. And his quote about Abbey Road, it's a slick job done by professionals. You know, I was guilty when I was young. I just took everything John Lennon said as gospel. So I formed that opinion. It's very hard sometimes to unform opinions when they're set at an early age, you know. But I absolutely love it. And I mean, talking about isolated tracks, the isolated vocals for, you know, the medley, that 20 minutes or whatever long, are just heavenly. You know, they're just gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as I said, the sound of Sun King is also gorgeous. And the sound of the next one, in fact.
Yeah, just to support what you said about Lennon. Yeah, Lennon talked a lot of shit that people completely took hook, line, and sinker. They'll believe anything. They will believe. Lennon fans, some of them, and this kind of makes me just, I think this is very childish, but they'll believe anything the guy says and take it to the bank, and then also believe the contradictory thing he says. I don't know how they can reconcile that, but that's typically what Lennon does to certain people. And I think it's very unfair of him to say, reduce this album. And he knew what he was doing. And there's times that he talked about when him and Paul had to get together and do this side too. And he sounded like there was some pride taking in doing that with him. And then years later, he kind of bitches about it, just like he did about Pepper, when he had a lot more input in Pepper than he let on. So, Lennon, typical Lennonisms, we got to kind of work around it, get to the truth on our own.
Yeah, I do. For anyone potentially going to listen to Glass Onion, I do take him to task.
You very much do, and I'm sure I will leave a link. And you've got 5 years of videos on mostly on Lennon, and you play a lot of great quotes, and you do take him to task. So that is appreciated
when it's required.
Okay, next song. We're another Abbey Road track, and it's "You Never Give Me Your Money." Now, this song is not typically thought of much as a guitar song, but it's got some of my favorite guitar playing by the Beatles in it. And we've got basically George doing some very controlled and smooth playing, and we've got this chunky rhythm playing again where it's needed. The song goes through these different movements. Paul takes us through all these the couple of his different voices. And then we have some nice John playing as well. So I'm going to play some stems of this, but Antony, why don't you give us your overall feeling on what you like about this song?
I'll give you my sloppy version of the stems. I would just say in terms of this song, I mean, this is just so underrated. This is a minor Beatles song in sense of how famous it is. But, I mean, every one of these parts, 4 or 5 parts, they're all just fabulous. I'm sure if this was anyone else's... Not everyone else, but a lesser bands did this song, surely this would be their big hit. This would be their big song. But just the fact that it's a fairly unknown, I would say, Beatles song. Probably most people would know "You Never Give Me Your Money," but they wouldn't know.
Yeah, I mean the average fans would not know this song. It's like if I asked my sisters wouldn't know. There's people that I know that know the Beatles and know the hits. The McCartney songs that get all the attention, Yesterday, Let It Be, Eleanor Rigby. But for my money, this is one of his best moments, I think, on a Beatle record.
And also, it's got a meaning. It's related to their life. You never give me your money, funny paper. It's obviously all about Apple, isn't it?
Yeah, and one thing here that I like about it, unlike some of Paul's more popular songs, I mean, this is definitely a band effort from top to bottom.
Yeah. So I'll just play a couple of little bits. The second bit, the Out of College, we're back to sort of rock. So it's sort of out of college. It shouldn't sound a million miles away from Sgt. Pepper when I play it like that. And then the bit that I absolutely love, we talked about it, I think, this twin guitar you've got.
Yeah.
John's sort of doing this. That bit. So he's playing a D shape. And then I'll just play a bit of this because I can't play this very well. But that chiming thing that you like.
Yeah.
He's doing a lot of that, and it's not complicated, but he does play that very well.
He was playing some nice guitar and on the song Get Back, and he was handling all those solos in the freezing cold January, with cold hands. And those arpeggios he's playing, I didn't quite always hear it that way. I can hear them in the song, but when it's isolated, it's like, wow, that sounds really, really nice. And some of that gets lost in the mix. So I'm going to play some with just the arpeggios of John, and then also with George's playing on top of it. Yeah, so George has got some nice fuzzy solos there, John underneath that, and it's it's the part of the song that doesn't get talked about much. People do talk about, well, yeah, the Beatles were breaking up, the money thing, and Paul does get a little bit of press for his vocal delivery on the song, but not a whole lot else. And I think this is one of McCartney's great pieces where he's taken us through these different movements, which he's known to do, and essentially is kind of maybe the foundation for most of side 2 of Abbey Road.
I mean, wouldn't you compare it a little bit to Quick One While He's Away by The Who?
Yeah, I would.
Not the content, but if you remember the Rock and Roll Circus, that amazing performance.
Yeah,
it's not that different because it's 4 or 5 bits, that are quite different from
That's
each other.
true. So that song was around a bit. The version they do on the Rock and Roll Circus is I think, far superior. But I wonder if Paul I'm sure he's had heard that song. I mean, Townsend was all the rage in '69. I mean, everybody was talking about his work, and Lennon, everybody's talking about him because he's rising to the top, doing new stuff.
Yeah, and again, I won't talk about it now, but for guitarists, study the chords of this song because they've moved on massively from, the 3 chords of I Saw Her Standing There, or 4 chords, or whatever it is. There's some really intricate chords in this as well. I mean, it's a very complicated song for a quote-unquote, rock band. And then at the end, of course, you get the... you get that C, B, A, which is... Again, this is simple, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all good children go to heaven. It sounds like it's just got the simplicity of a kid's song, so I actually quite like that lyric even.
Yeah. Yeah, that nursery rhymey stuff that they add in, it just makes it so charming and so timeless, actually.
Yeah. Of course, I didn't realise, Sunking... does it follow this? Yeah, it does. Because you get these, for no particular reason, these crickets chirping.
Yeah.
That makes me think of summer, sort of continental, exotic holidays and stuff.
Yeah, I still remember when I was first really getting into this album. So I always talk about my buddy Dan and how his sister bought him all these Beatle albums. So in one summer, we could listen to almost the whole catalog. We pulled a few other albums of theirs out of the record crates. And I had pulled out Abbey Road, and somehow one of his brothers or sisters took that back. So Dan bought Abbey Road for me for my birthday, like when I was 12. So that's when I started listening to this, and I remember listening to it in like late spring. So these crickets chirping, I still get taken back to that time that I listened to it because, you're a kid and everything is just so much, your senses are just so much more, awake, I guess. So yeah, that's what
now I think of it, the chiming guitar would fit with that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
This is very relaxed feel, the sun, an exotic holiday, sitting in a villa, having a drink, and hearing the crickets and hearing some lovely bit of guitar. So it all fits.
Well, the next song will be something we don't need to just listen to, but we can see. So they're starting to do deconstructions of the rooftop performance. And what I want to play here is Dig a Pony. Now, this is not one of the Beatles' stronger songs. In fact, I hear people say, oh, this is not a favorite of mine. In fact, I don't like it that much. But I wanted to just play this track for you and some of George's isolated guitar playing because it's typical George. He's filling in. He obviously had been rehearsing this over the month of January. And here on the rooftop, he really nails it. And these isolated tracks show how much that their practicing did pay off.
It's interesting, I just thought of something when I was thinking about this. I would say what most people, if you asked 100 people, played them the rooftop songs, which are the weakest songs objectively, they'd probably say Dig a Pony and One After 909. But they were the only ones they only played once. And I think it's probably because they nailed them. They really nailed those songs.
Yeah, yeah.
And I still quite like Dig a Pony. It's got those interesting lyrics that are kind of nonsense, but you could read something into it. But guitar-wise, I mean, they do... Oops. They're both playing that. And that's got a bit of country twang. And then this is John. We know how John sort of repeated himself. Again, not in a bad way, but so he's playing. It sounds a bit like a. It's the same shape as I've Got a Feeling. And then George again. Obviously you're playing the stem, which is much better than what I could play, but he's sort of. Yeah, so I love George's. Again, it's quite trebly, isn't it? Like John's doing a fairly basic strumming, but George, I like George when he's twangy. It's, trebly and twangy.
And I think what George is doing is he's taking a song that's got some space in it, that needs some filling and needs something in it. And that's, you hear McCartney do that with his bass playing. You hear Lennon do that with some of his rhythm playing here. Harrison's doing it with his lead playing. And I think that's one of the ways the Beatles worked together. Where there was space, they just kind of would fill in on their instrument. And I think that's what makes some of these pieces fall in and out. Like a lot of bands, you just hear lead playing throughout the whole song, rhythm playing throughout the whole song. But the Beatles are kind of in and out. And then they'll drop, in the overdubbing process, they'll drop other instruments in. So I've always appreciated that as how they built their songs.
Yeah, I don't know what interview it was. I think it was Paul said they wanted to pack every second with value. Yeah, they didn't want to give the listener a wasted couple of seconds where all you're hearing is a guitar just strumming a chord. That's why even lyrically they did a sort of a songwriting trick where if you have a verse, if you repeat a verse, you might change one of the words or change one of the chords. So it's this idea. I don't know where they got that from, or maybe they just figured it out themselves. They're packing every song with value,
Yeah, that reminds me of their Hamburg days when they wouldn't repeat a song playing all night long. I think it was just a pride thing. I think they didn't want to have somebody get on them for a cheap repeat of a chorus, but they would change it up a little bit. I think that's just a pride issue.
Yeah, but yeah, definitely. And I always have to remember as well what you said with the rooftop, that it's freezing cold. I mean, that does make a difference.
Yeah.
I've never played an outdoor gig in January, ever. And I can't imagine...
On a rooftop, no, that's like 6 stories up.
And now I think we've got all the isolated bits from all of them on the rooftop, so you can hear for every song what each of them are doing.
Yeah.
And it's just glorious, isn't it? Yeah. So,
yeah, for sure.
Getting ready for this is just to heighten my appreciation of their parts and their playing as well.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to do other parts. We can do. We don't have to just stick to guitar. There's a lot in these songs and a lot of little nuggets in there that are really fun to find out. And sometimes you don't find them until you listen to the isolated and deconstructions, because they might be buried in the mix or just too low to really notice. So that's one of the things I keep discovering about the Beatles and discovering about their music is these isolated deconstructions.
Well, have you ever seen that video of, I think it's Giles Martin and George's son, and someone plays this lost solo on Here Comes the Sun?
And here was a guitar solo that he played, which was never made the final cut.
It's totally different to anything I've ever heard.
Yeah. You never used it?
No.
I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah. I never even knew about that, so.
In fact, in one of the deconstructions, that solo is added back in there so you can hear it. So that, I think they made the right call in leaving it out, because I think the way they left it, less was more in that case, and I thought it was just perfect.
There are guys now that are really listening really hard.
Yeah.
You can hear these kind of lost bits of guitar or piano, whatever it is. So I think there's still more. And I think in the archives of Abbey Road, there'll still be stuff coming out. I mean, a couple of years ago we had that thing with Revolver and the fact that John Lennon had started Yellow Submarine. It was like, where did that come from?
Exactly. I mean, that's not the story we've been told all these years.
Yeah.
Like, wow. I mean, and that part of the history doesn't lie. I mean, you can't that's just how it was. He came up with the melody and the tune, and it kind of went from there.
So I think there's still bits of songs that all, might get Carnival Light eventually. I think that might be a bit of an anticlimax, to be fair. But
Yeah, I think totally. But it's one thing that I think we should have, because it also was a part of that whole culture, that whole swinging '60s and swinging London, and these happenings. I think it's an important part of their history, and it seems to me that there's some pettiness holding it back from us.
Yeah, maybe. I think the long version of Helter Skelter would be the bigger anticlimax, because it's 27 minutes of the anthology version as opposed to the finished version.
Yeah, John Lennon playing the same bass note for half an hour, basically. I mean, all right, but people, people just want to hear it all, and you get teased about it for so long, and then. Well.
Yeah. Can I just finish with this? This is not about guitar, but the George's violin on All You Need Is Love.
Oh.
It's horrible. And John's drunken sax on Helter Skelter. Why is it when I hear the finished songs, they just don't bother me at all? Like, they just
you're kind of bringing up a couple of things I was going to suggest for a part two, okay. But yeah, I mean, those are the things I was talking about, with these little things that are dropped in that just seem to work. And I think part of the creative process with those guys is they brought an energy to it and a spontaneity to it, and that's what helps makes these songs timeless, I think.
I'll always be a fan.
Oh, yeah. All right, Anthony. Well, thank you so much for helping me put this together, and hopefully we'll do a couple other pieces like this as well if people like it. And people can find you at Glass Onion on John Lennon here on YouTube. You've got a couple other channels that we'll put links to as well. And glad to have you back. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been fun learning a bit more about these songs, and again, it's, as I said earlier, it's just heightening my appreciation. And I'll get you back on Glass Onion as well one time. So we'll be working together in the future. Thanks.
All right, you're welcome. I'll be there. Talk to you soon.